Hello. Shall we give everyone 1 minute or are we ready to start? I can't. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sophie Pope from Corecentric, and today we're going to be running a webinar on how to optimize your spend and growth, leveraging source to pay for spend management. So a couple of housekeeping items before we start. The boring stuff. Please feel free to ask us questions. Write them down in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can at an appropriate point. We are going to have hopefully time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask away as we go. And we will send this presentation to you via email afterwards, if you so wish. And the session is also recorded, so if you need to drop off for any reason, then you can catch up with it later. To do a few introductions to start, I'm joined today by my colleague, Matt Markham. I will allow Matt to introduce himself. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Sophie. Hi, everybody. Matt Markham here. I'm based in Minneapolis, St. Paul in the United States. My responsibility at Corecentric is I'm the Vice President of Product Management for our source-to-pay platforms, of which the platform we're talking today is the key platform in that. I've been in this role for about 4+ years now, and been with the company 12+ years now in a variety of roles, about 20 years. Overall in this space, selling source to pay platforms as a sales engineer, among other things. So well versed in the space and delighted to be here.
Thank you. Wonderful. And yeah, Matt and I have about the same tenure with Corecentric actually. So my name is Sophie Pope. I will be your moderator and also presenter, multi-talented, for the webinar today. So my name, so I'm the sales director for source to pay for Corecentric. I worked for about 10 or so years in procurement and procurement leadership roles in pharma and manufacturing. I've spent the last 10 to 12 years in procurement and finance transformation, so working for notable names in retail, financial services, manufacturing, healthcare, pharma, companies like Tesco, Nike, A.T. Kearney, AWS, big names. And I just noticed that my Teams is on the screen, so that's scary, but I'll try and turn that off in a second. So yes, I have been working with these kind of companies to generate cost down strategies, and largely through the use of automation technology, how we can help customers to save and improve their processes, improve process efficiencies through the use of the latest and greatest technology. So with that said, what are we going to cover today? Well, we are going to look at cost savings as a focus. So according to the Hackett Group's 2024 key issues report, key findings report, procurement leaders have voted top cost savings back #1 priority for 2024. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Where does savings come from? Initially, we're going to chunk out the source to pay process into the source to contract part initially. So that's where you are finding your cost down strategy, where you're building your framework, and then moving on to the transactional area, which is really how do you make that happen. So the procure to pay part, how you stick to your purchasing policy and monitor how you're doing against what you've set out to do. And then we're going to have some Q&A at the end. So to kick off then, this is the Hackett Group survey that I was talking about. It's 2024 procurement key issues study, and really, you know, it's been a top priority for a long time for procurement leaders to reduce costs. Why is it so important? Again, well, business executives in general are worrying, understandably still concerned about the economic climate. So, 62% worry that interest rates are going to affect their ability to invest. Nearly 60% are still worried about recession. Nearly half are worried about labour shortages. So overall, there is this concern that we are not going to be able to grow. And in order to, focus on look at the margin for cost reduction rather than growth. So it's really about kind of focusing on where you can save money, and how we're doing that largely is through the top two strategies that came out of that survey. So 83% of respondents said that actually they were looking to make process improvements and automation. Now, I know, and Matt's been in this business a long time as well, those two come hand in hand. You can't really automate without looking at your processes and making sure that they're the right ones, so improving efficiencies. We're going to focus on how you can implement these strategies in source to pay today, and what kind of savings you can look to make. So what costs are we talking about? Most of you will know this, but I'm going to define it anyway. So we tend to bucket costs into two buckets. You've got direct costs, which are those associated with bringing your product or service to market. So they're direct raw materials, goods and services for resale. Anyone who is associated with that process, could be lawyers if you're a legal firm, could be widgets if you're making something. The other bucket is indirect costs. Obviously, this is anything that's supporting that process, so not directly attributed to bringing your product to market, but those supporting, so utilities, support staff. When we're talking through the processes today, there are significant savings that could be achieved from both direct and indirect costs. Some parts of the process lend themselves to one of these areas a little more. Indirects is often an area that is, potentially under scrutinized in comparison to direct costs. So there's usually a lot of unknowns in your indirects. There's a high transaction level. There may be a lot of potential for cost saving. So a lot of what we're going to discuss today focuses around indirects, but of course it could apply to directs as well. So let's kick off with the first half of the process then. It's really about establishing your cost down strategy and setting your purchasing policy. So this is a source to pay cycle. For those of you who aren't familiar with this process, I'm going to zip through it quickly, and then we're going to look at the first half in a little bit more detail, and show you actually in the system what that could look like. So really the source to pay process will start with analytics, right? So you need to know what you're spending, with whom, and when, across the whole organization. And in order to do that, you need to gather all of your spend, and really start to build a plan for what you're going to spend time strategically sourcing. So what are you going to focus your resources on to go out and find those savings? Once you've sourced and you've got competitive product, obviously you need pricing. You need to get your suppliers engaged with your company in an as efficient manner as possible, and to reduce risk, and then really get that pricing locked into to contracts. And this is a kind of bridge at the contract point between where we move from what we call source to contract to purchase to pay, which is really the second half of the process, which we'll go into more detail later. But this is really where you manage the transactional element of procurement. So it's about how do you collect the need from your staff? How do you capture that in a really streamlined way? How do you collect invoices and match those invoices to the purchase orders? You know, how do you cost allocate and manage your budgets? And then also, how do you actually pay your suppliers at the end? So to kick off then with spend analysis, this is always a really interesting way to start. You know, you're going to take all of your spend and you're going to have a look, as I say, you know, the data needs to be cleansed. It needs to be deduplicated. You need to make sure that it's categorized properly against a sensible taxonomy. So it could be UNSPSC, but it could be an internal one. Or, you know, it could be a more procurement focused taxonomy as well. So what do you do with this data? Well, essentially, you can start looking at how to benchmark what you're spending against other similar organizations to yourselves. You know, where are you overspending? What are the project what are the anticipated savings if you were to tackle a sourcing project? And to do this, you then can start to build your sourcing opportunity pipeline. And obviously it's a little bit more complex than that, but at a high level, that's what we would start to suggest. How can you make savings to consolidate your suppliers? How do you understand what the level of maverick spend or uncontrolled spend is across the organization? You know, the missed opportunities of where you've got contracts but you're not buying from them. Those kind of things, really you need to have a holistic view of both direct and indirect spend in order to understand where you should be spending your time. Then we get to strategic sourcing, and this one could be a big winner, you know, because you can prioritize your sourcing events based on a few criteria that would mean you're more likely to succeed. You know, you want to pick categories not only based on the business need, although that is obvious, you know, you're not buying something you don't need, but you need to have consistent and high volumes. You need to have a competitive marketplace. You need to have, you know, quite a few suppliers really to make it a competitive event and to warrant the time spent. You know, when was the last time you contracted for this goods or service? Really attack things that haven't been looked at for a while or where the market has been volatile, and really think about, you know, going for quick wins. Like sourcing is one of those modules or one of those processes that can be really, really effective with technology if you know what you're doing. You can really spend, you know, I know a project that I did probably 10 years ago now. It was for, well, it was, I won't say who it was for, but it was a vending machine company, and I know we ended up paying, we ended up saving the client over 200 million in chocolate powder, which was amazing, and, you know, paid for the solution within the first month of going live. So this is something that is powerful, that is, if it's understood, yeah, it's a great place to generate really powerful savings quickly. Next step is really about onboarding your suppliers. So the two areas here that you want to focus on are, you know, making sure that you minimize the work that you spend doing as much as possible, and pushing the admin to the suppliers, but also making sure that you're protecting yourself against risk, because risk actually can be so costly. You know, it's one of those unknown costs until it hits you in the face. But the important thing is, you know, to build your onboarding supplier program so that the right people are involved at the right time. You don't have everyone seeing everything all of the time. You know, if you put the effort in at the beginning, you can set up your processes to be, to run automatically without a huge amount of input, and then changes to that process can be implemented quickly and easily. So if there is a new requirement, or you suddenly have a need to see all of your suppliers, of course it's important to kind of share this information across the organization. And this is somewhere where you can really save yourself time on back and forth and communication if you have a supplier portal. And then, of course, next steps could be, building a scorecarding process online so that you automatically pull in a lot of information based on your supplier's performance. Really, the best supplier performance programs I've seen, the ones that are running on automatic data input rather than anyone actually filling in data reviews, and of course, linked to third-party providers. Then next stage is obviously contract management. So this is where you really solidify the relationship with your supplier. So you're fixing your cost, you're fixing your terms, but a contract is only good if someone is actually buying from it, right? So how do you make sure that is integrated into the world of purchasing, without someone having to go, oh, I thought we had a contract for that, or having this convoluted manual system of going back and forth. The process time savings relating to contract management, automation could be upward of 50% if you do it right. You're going to be able to remove bottlenecks with your expensive team players along the way, like your legal, that might be overworked. You can push that work out to the user base a lot more, or to your teams a lot more, with contract templates, contract request process. You can define exactly what it is that the customers that your teammates want to define when it comes to building a contract. So contract in terms of cost saving is not just about, have we got the best price and have we fixed that? It's how do we make that streamline into an automatic process for people to buy from that contract without having these lengthy manual loops. So of course, there's things like e-signature, that's going to save time, and execs love it because you don't even have to go into a platform half the time. You can just approve things from their phone, or with us, we have Teams interface now. So it's a big cost saving in terms of time, but in terms of giving you the freedom to be able to do more cost saving activity in it rather than manual steps. So with that, I am going to hand over to Matt, and Matt's going to give us a quick run through source to contract and show us a bit more about the platform.
All right, make sure I'm off mute here and let me share my screen. Screen monitor 2. All right, can I confirm that we are seeing a page that says analytics?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm gonna use our platform as a way to illustrate much of what Sophie just talked about. And so we're gonna get a little bit of a smattering of all kinds of things here. Let me shift to this screen. To start off, I want to sort of introduce how this platform does what it does so that it's not confusing what you see here. One of the things, sort of a key recurring theme you'll see in everything I'm doing here is visibility. One of the benefits of using software tools like this is it provides visibility that you just can't get any other way. And this particular platform happens to show that visibility through connections to other records, how records are related to each other, whether it's how is a supplier related to a PO, how is a contract related to a counterparty. Any of those relationships between the records that are created make this thing really, really powerful. But in order to understand that, I need to just sort of show off here what you're seeing on the screen. So the main screen here, typical platform, right? There's a menu on the side or across the top that shows you what you can do. menu changes based on the authorizations that you have as a user. I'm logged in as me right now. I'm what's called a super admin. That makes me sound really important. But as a super admin, I see lots of things. So I'm going to show you what I see and then show you what a typical user should see here. So clearly we have the procure to pay module turned on. That's why this cart and catalog block shows here. But the shortcuts is based on the permissions I have as a user, trying to show me common things I would do as a user with the rights that I have. So things like invite a new supplier, or request a new contract, and so forth. These colorful blocks on here that look overwhelming when you're logged in as me, because again, I have access to all kinds of stuff here. This is a way of the system telling you, the system wants you to take action. So whether it's directed specifically at you, things like your bank accounts to send, or invoices pending your approval, those are directed at me specifically. Whereas things like this one, sourcing events to send for approval, not necessarily directed at me specifically, but directed at people that have rights to take action here. Similar down here, but slightly different in progress. This is showing me things that are interesting to me, hopefully are interesting to me, but it's not asking me to take action. So for example here, your active catalog. So these are catalogs that I own as a user in the system. Your requisitions waiting for approval. It's not waiting for me to approve, it's waiting for someone else to approve. It's giving me sort of the FYI here of what's going on. So let's contrast that with what's happening here with a typical user here. We'll use my favorite typical user, Peter. So when Peter logs in, he is purely a requisitioner and can receive things. So he sees a lot less things. He still sees the cart and catalog because he can create requisitions and buy stuff in the platform. He's still got shortcuts, just a lot less. His to-do is a lot smaller. His in progress is a lot smaller. And although you don't see all of the changes to the menus underneath here, there's a lot less menus that he has access to. Okay, so quick overview of what the platform does. Let's take a look at how some of these things get tied together. And to do that, we'll log back in as me here. In fact, I'm going to use this one here. You're going to see me switch between two demo environments, and that's sort of normal for me to do that. Two different environments have two different sets of data. Allows me to show some things here. So I'm looking at a list of suppliers in the system, actually a filtered list. I was searching for a specific supplier, Microsoft. And the reason I'm grabbing this is this shows neatly how everything is tied together in the platform. So we're going to pull up Microsoft in this case. Microsoft is a supplier to this fictitious company called Demo Corp. The first thing I want you to notice is across the top here, this bar here that has got three colors, gray, black, and green here. This is showing me what we call the life cycle of this object. So the workflow process by which this object lives its life. In this case, a supplier. It can be very simple. It can only have, as few as 3 to 4 or 5 steps like you're seeing here. It might actually have contract management has more than 20 steps. Generally, you start at the left and you work your way to the right. Green telling me where you are currently. So we're currently in active state here, and sort of a little tidbit here. If you click on it, it'll actually tell you who got you to that state and when they got there. So a little bit of the audit trail showing right across the top here. Underneath the life cycle is where we start to lay out the information we know about this object. So this is a supplier, Microsoft, so they have things like who are they, a number of fields describing who they are, a number of fields describing here on the second tab where they are. If they have more than one place where they exist, we create what are called sites, and on down the list here. The thing that I most wanted to show off is from a supplier management point of view that when you're looking at suppliers in the system, we can collect not just information about who they are, but what they're doing in the system. And for that, I'm going to just lean here a second on related data. So again, based on permissions, being a super admin, I get to see everything. Woo, yay me. But what we do here is we're showing all of this stuff linked together in an interesting way here. So as an example here, purchase orders. So this is showing me a list. I don't have any recent purchases within the last year, so we'll clear that filter. This is a list of all of the purchase orders that we've ever done with Microsoft, and I can get to them directly from here, not having to go to the purchase order repository and filter based on Microsoft and blah, 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 blah. I can immediately get a look at what's happening for this particular supplier. any bids for any sourcing events they've been a party to in the platform, that's going to show under here. Any contracts, all of that information is directly right here at my fingertips. Not just showing me, but I can go to those records and even search and filter them down even a little more if I want to. So simply by just looking at what's happening in the platform, I can get to interesting information or the information I'm looking for contextually, right? So I don't have to, if I'm looking for a requisition that includes Microsoft, I can go to Microsoft and look up requisitions, or I can go to the requisitions and search and filter based on Microsoft. You have a myriad of ways to do the same thing. You'll notice a few things in here. Anytime you see what looks like a hyperlink, it actually is, right? So it's a hyperlink showing me information about whatever that object is or that place is that's linked, and allows me to either view it in a modal pop-up or even open the record directly. Okay, so with that said, let's sort of start talking about the source to contract process. And Sophie immediately started off by saying we want to look at how we're spending today, right? A spend assessment or a spend analysis. And while there was a screenshot, I'll point out that that's part of the information that we can gain access to directly in the platform. And so interactively, this is showing an example of a spend analysis that was done for, again, fictitious company. But what we're seeing here is a total of $610,000 in spend here. And as we look at how it's presenting that to us, it's showing it to us based on our category of spend or commodity, we'll sometimes call it, showing me the suppliers that are involved in that spend, how that spend has been distributed across the various departments in the company, as well as down to the individual locations in the company. And this is entirely interactive, right? So if I want to understand, we're spending a heck of a lot of money in marketing. If I want to just focus on marketing, I'll click on it, and it's going to show me the level 2 spend. So these are the categories that exist under marketing, and all of these other views have repainted to show me how we're spending it. So we're clearly spending a lot with agency for healthcare. In fact, I'd wager we're spending almost all of our money with agency for healthcare. We're seeing clearly we're spending 26,715 on that. And we can continue to narrow this down and just sort of explore the spend as we go through here. So the idea is that the spend is interactive, whether that's spend coming from our platform or spend coming from outside information that you provide to us. We can take that information and slice it and dice it to learn some things that are going to drive the behaviors that we're moving forward with. Okay. Just as an aside here, so spend analysis with combined data from outside the platform and inside the platform. We can also just look at that data from directly in the platform itself. There's a variation of that spend analysis being done right in the platform here. So if we look at it from this point of view, this is tracking just spend in the platform here, showing over the last 12 months. Professional services has been the primary spend in this particular platform, and most of it going to Powertrain Pro, and then distributed across several of what we call invoicing companies or billing entities, and then cost centers, think of those as departments. So same idea here, we can drill into the spend and start to understand what's happening here. What's really interesting about this is actually leads to, if I was to grab, let's grab IT hardware. Too late, already clicked on the other one. So focusing here just on that one particular commodity, there's a button up here called purchase items, and this will actually show me the individual things that are part of that filter that we have purchased that are related to it. So this is the data that's driving that thing that we just saw. And so this leads me down to the line items, which inherently leads me to the requisitions and POs that are involved in all this. Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment and talk about supplier management and how suppliers even get into the system, because that's one of the key things is when you're managing a supplier, you want to make it as simple as possible. And so what we've done here, if we go back to our friends Microsoft, we're allowed to create what are called onboarding steps. Sometimes you'll see them labeled here certifications. I've heard them called qualifications. There's lots of ways you can describe them. I like to call it onboarding steps. That makes sense to people. And so as we bring a supplier on board, every supplier has some basic information we need, right? That's the stuff in this identification location tab. Who are you? What do you sell? Where are you? How do we bill you? How do you bill us? All of that kind of information. But then there's the stuff that you care about, and that could be anything. It could be I want an NDA. I want to ask you some questions about your financial situations. I need some kind of a certificate of insurance. You define what these onboarding steps are, and let's take a look at a certificate of insurance as an example. So this was a request to the supplier for a document. And so we request that from the supplier, they provide it to us. We can then view it, assess whether it gives us the information we need, and then ultimately decide if we accept it or reject it. And so we build these certification steps. They're rules-based. We define the order in which they're asked. One step can be dependent on another. It's very, very simple to put together and allows us to organize the information in a way that makes sense, in an order that makes sense, and have the right people review it along the way. So as an example here, here's the finance one. This is a questionnaire we're asking them. So rather than request a document, we're asking them to give us a series of answers to questions we provide to them. We might have people review those questionnaires to give us answers. We might not. In this particular case, you're seeing not. Those questionnaires might actually drive a score, and that score can be used then in the scorecarding module. So as an example here, here's an example set of scores that are being tracked here. So basically what you do is you group scores in what are called categories, and then you have the metrics and then the metric categories here. And so lead time is broken down into quotes turn lead time and on time and full delivery. Those three scores make up the overall lead time score of 65.33. That can be driven through the onboarding process. Some of these KPIs can be driven through that. Can be driven through ratings evaluations that are either sent externally or internally. It can be ratings on receipt, lots of ways to drive this. But the point being is we can start to collect external data. Yep, thank you. So if you have another system that is collecting some of this data, it can be internally imported into this system so that we can keep track of it here. And of course, we can see how the scores change over time if they do change over time. So we'll see that represented here as well.
Yeah, I've seen quite often metrics having a category of cost saving. So, it may be that, it's a particular cost down strategy that buyer will have or set for their suppliers. If you've got a typical supplier that you're spending 50% of your particular category budget with, then it makes sense to measure them on how they're doing in terms of cost performance. Give them the opportunity to come up with ways to come up with cost savings. This is a simple way for everyone to see tangible results of how that supplier is performing, which means you can have meaningful conversations when it comes to business reviews and cost negotiation. You have data to draw back on, which is really useful in real life when you're managing your top suppliers, or all of them. But most go with a a kind of matrix or Kraljix or whatever to segment your suppliers up front. But yes, it's definitely a cost saving focus as well, actually, through qualitative management.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I've seen this used for is because this scorecard is actually being driven by ratings that could come from the onboarding process, could come from a sourcing event even, is that the scorecard actually becomes into play almost immediately, right? So we don't actually have to have done business with them to have a score on the scorecard. We have one customer that uses the scorecard. Actually, the first thing they do is they're collecting information on the supplier via questionnaire in the onboarding process. These are questions that drive a score of risk.
Risk, yeah.
And so based on some qualitative numbers they put around risk, have you filed for bankruptcy in the last 5 years? That generates a particular score for them, and that score gets rolled up into an overall risk score that is part of the scorecard then before you even do business with them.
Yeah. And if it's not part of your strategy to review that kind of data, it could be because you suddenly have an alert system to say, well, actually, we've noticed that, X% of our suppliers that had a previous history of bankruptcy in the last 6 months actually went on to have financial problems later on. So you can build in some, it's one it's one example of where actually having the visibility across lots of different functions, or you know, what we call business functions, actually is really useful, because it can influence your policy and your practical decisions, because you can see what's happening in front of you. And it's not about necessarily about the individual case either. It's more about, what do you see in terms of trends? You know, you're releasing your team from all this manual admin, so that you can actually focus on those strategic trends that you're seeing within your supply base. So it can be very powerful to have this information accessible to different teams.
All right, so quick intro to managing suppliers. Very flexible, very configurable in terms of how you want to set it up and what things you care to track and want to track. So sort of the next phase in this would be sourcing. And so sourcing can actually come before onboarding, can come after onboarding, can be part of the onboarding process. But the basic concept with sourcing is, now that we have a supplier in the system, or at least a prospect in the system, we want to collect additional information about them. And so I'm just going to give you a quick tour of sourcing and how it sort of plays into this process. Let me just clear something here. Grab a few ones, grab a little older one, so I've got some better data to show you. Sure, we'll use this one. Okay, so first thing, right, first time we looked at another object sourcing event, right? So their sourcing event has its own life cycle. This one's in done state, so it hasn't, it's been finished, it's been awarded, but we haven't gone past that at the moment. But a few things to keep in mind. So a sourcing event is about doing one of two things or both things. What we traditionally call an RFI, that would be sort of question and answer based, right? I'm going to give you a set of questions or a series of question sets. You're going to give me some answers. I'm going to do some scoring. The other kind of sourcing event, standalone, would be what we call an RFQ. So that's I'm asking for you to give me prices on these specific things, whether those things are services or widgets or whatever it may be. Think of a pricing matrix of trying to get prices out of you. And then, of course, you can combine both of them. Very often, we would call that an RFP, so a questionnaire component and an RFQ component. So how that's broken out here is, this one actually is only showing an RFQ, so that's just widgets and line items. And so this is showing me here, someone's looking for a particular item here. This is the price we paid for it before, looking for a price now. So this kind of sourcing event can be a standalone thing, or it could be part of a requisitioning process, could be part of vetting a supplier, could be any of those things. But then we'll collect the information on those individual bids through what are called supplier bids. So it's been handed off to a couple of different suppliers here. One of our sales engineers, Jessica, was actually playing with this. I can see she's just got some generic suppliers in here. But you can have as many suppliers as you want participate in an event. You can set minimum numbers of suppliers to capture the information that you care about. But ultimately, what you really care about is the analysis of the sourcing event and the bids that the suppliers gave you. And so this one's pretty simple. We're just looking at price and quantity. And so we can see here that one supplier offered a price of 50, the other supplier offered a price of 45. And so that supplier here, colored in green, that's who the award went to. Now, had we done an RFI, so sets of questionnaires, we would see side by side the answers to the questions in the questionnaires in the same tool, so we can learn all kinds of information about the suppliers from there. Okay. So I want to point out that the sourcing event often leads to this next sort of piece in that source to contract, which is in fact creating a contract. And so I'm going to show you a contract that's already sort of pre-done, so you get an idea. I happen to have one staged here ready to go. Play the Julia Childs thing here. We don't need to create it. I'll just pull one out of the oven and we can take a look at it. Okay, so here's an example of a contract And this contract is showing us, again, contracts have their own life cycle here. This one actually is sitting in modified at the moment. Generally, it would sit in active if it was in use. But the basic idea here is we're collecting information about the contract. If it's coming from a sourcing event, the sourcing event items that are involved in it. The thing I most cared about is this guy right here, and that is from a procurement standpoint, once we've done the sourcing event, and if it's something we're going to buy over and over again, we can associate it to a catalog with pricing that was negotiated through the sourcing event. And that means that when I buy stuff in here, I'm making sure I'm buying it at the agreed upon contract price. And then I can do things like track the savings that we had generated through the sourcing event process with the discounting that they gave us through the sourcing event, just to be able to track that overall saving. But it's not just the mechanics of managing the pricing and the details of the contract. Sure, it does all that, but contract management also tracks the actual document itself. And if we take a look at this guy here, let's open it up and take a look at it. So this is the contract document that was generated by the system, filling in the blanks from the data in the contract here into from a contract template. And it's actually managing it all the way through the e-signature process, in this case using DocuSign to do this signature process on here. So it's not just, again, not just the mechanics of here's the data in the contract, here's how I apply that data, but the actual document management of collecting, generating the documents, managing the version control on it. This one actually has simple 2 versions. The original one that was unsigned, and then the DocuSign returned signed version of it. So just 2 versions in this, but there may be, you know, a dozen different versions as this thing goes through the redlining process. Okay, so that was a quick source to contract overview. I'm going to turn it back to Sophie to sort of talk about the rest of the process.
Sure, and for a quick time check, display mode, you can tell we're live, so that's good. Brilliant. So we haven't got a huge amount of time to run through the procure to pay process, but we will be able to cover it. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to go through the basic steps. We have talked about the overview in summary. The procure to pay part of the solution is, or the process is, really about making sure that you're monitoring and conforming to that procurement policy that you've set. So it's about guiding your users to buy the right products from those contracts. It's about giving them the availability of options so that you can do the work up front. So approvals, coding, cost coding, budget management, all of that really needs to happen before you pay, before you spend your money, because there's no point in controlling it thereafter. So we're going to run through very quickly a couple of slides, and then actually I'm going to jump back into the demo, and I think Matt and I will talk through the steps in terms of where the cost savings will happen at each step together as we look through the system. So you know, you are establishing your procurement policy, you have your approved supplier list, you have your pre-negotiated agreements, you have catalogs, and you have generic item catalogs, which is something that we'll look at in a second, but it really allows you to do exactly that, which is code and basically predefine the work up front. So when you can define cost codes or GL accounts up front, and it really allows you to control and view that process as you go. So once you have this purchasing process in place, you know, you've got the option to not only look at that spend that we looked at the beginning, but also monitor, say on an invoice level, exactly what's going on in terms of, you know, the days it takes to pay an invoice, you know, where in the process the time is getting stuck. So if it's sitting in approval for a long time, or it's taking ages to be reviewed, a lot of that will be negated with an automated process. So to look at the P2P process very quickly, there are obviously a number of key steps where you're going to be able to save money and save time, essentially. So right the way through from that identification of need and visibility of shopping carts, and how your users request things that they want to buy. That's the first point of control, because that's where you can define, these are the preferred suppliers, these are the best pricing. You can show them pricing side by side. You can allow that structure to assign costs and budget up front, allowing the approvers to know what they're signing off before have visibility of total spends up to that point. Creating the purchase orders. Oh, I've worked where we've done it manually. That was I know that was a while ago, but it just is an unbelievable time resource and opportunity for error, honestly, even with the best people involved. Receipt of those orders at the suppliers, then massive one at the moment, which is acquisition of the invoice. How do you avoid having to sit and manually input invoices from all of these different routes into the business? How do you reconcile those invoices, and then essentially generating the accounting entries to plug into your finance system to get the suppliers paid? So the average cost of this whole flow can really come anywhere between 10 and 100. 150 pounds, actually, I think that's supposed to say, with a median around 100. And I think the latest results dictate that you could probably save, well, I think it's Boston Consultant Group think that you can save between 5 and 10% of your total expenditure by automating the process. And we actually calculate that you can generate this flow in less than £2 per flow from £100 median, with full automation and AI, which we have another webinar coming up on the 4th of July to talk about the AI applications. You can also have a look at videos on our website. But before I go into the steps of the P2P process, I will send everyone a copy of this, which details the challenges and savings at each step. But Matt and I are now going to take the opportunity to review in the system the P2P process, and we'll talk through where those cost savings come into play. If you're happy with that, Matt.
I am.
Brilliant. I shall hand back over to you. That was a quick whiz through P2P, wasn't it?
All right. Confirm that we can see
the system anyway, not me, chat.
Confirm that you can see a shopping cart experience.
Absolutely.
All right.
So typically there would be, hundreds of suppliers. Who knows where people need to buy things from? This is a way of defining that framework so that you can control the costs.
Yeah, in fact, what's happened in this particular case, how we got here was I asked my user, in this case it's just still me, to create a requisition tied to an internal entity called DemoCorp UK, shipping to DemoCorp UK procurement and charging to DemoCorp UK procurement. That actually then made some decisions for me, which made it pretty easy. Because I only have one catalog that works with DemoCorp UK at the moment in this particular setup. So it pre-selected the catalog for me and is showing me the results of that catalog. So I could have actually, done a search to find it if there's more than just a few items like there are here. I can take a look at the individual catalog repositories that I have access to. The administrators of the system can set up what are called preset kits. So that's a combination of items that I can add to a shopping cart en masse. But the basic idea here is to make this as Amazon-like as possible. So show you results quickly, give you the ability to do things like just, add to the cart right from here. And while we do that, you can see over here on the right-hand side, although it looks like it's a simple shopping cart experience, behind the scenes, what it's actually doing is it's already figuring out some of the information I need to do internally to account for this kind of a purchase. So as an example here, if I was to proceed to checkout, this is going to show me the requisition it was building in the background. And that requisition, of course, includes the line items we picked here, collecting all the pieces of information I need. More importantly than that, though, it's collecting already what we call the allocation info, how I'm going to charge and track this particular item, showing me that it already associated it with a budget and a sub-budget, which I'll show you in a second. Some additional coding entities here, which I'm just calling code, subcode, code to project. sort of generic names here, but think of things like ledger accounts, project codes, some sort of internal coding. Those can be either set manually or be set via rules here, and we'll show that next. It's also keeping track of things like how much tax do I charge? Is the tax recoverable? So it's figuring out a lot of stuff just by me saying proceed to checkout. What we can see here is that there are two budgets associated with. They're indented from each other, right? This is the high level budget called operating budget 2024. Other ops 2024 is a sub budget of this, and so it's showing me it chose automatically based on rules the budget for the items that I have selected here, and it's showing me where we still have money in these, right? So the important part is there's green left. That means there's money left that I can spend in these budgets. Red is invoiced, right? So that's money I can't spend. And then the orange and the yellow represent requisitions and purchase orders. Okay, so the next step for a user in this process might be to go to the cost allocations here and provide some of those missing allocation missing allocation choices. And to make it easy for me, I've organized this screen to just show the codes and subcodes and code twos right next to each other, right within the screen here. And it's just a matter of picking the right ones or overriding the system if the system made some choices and then moving on with my day. So the goal here is to make this as automated and as simple as possible. Once I've done all of that, the next step in the process is to send this requisition for approval. And so the system uses approval rules to determine what needs to be approved. And based on those approval rules, it'll route the approvals as necessary. And this is true for anything in the system, whether this is a purchase order, a requisition, a contract, even a supplier can have an approval flow on them. So by me sending this for approval, the system is checking what approval rules apply and seeing if there are any that need to be applied for this particular one. And what it found is that it found 2 approvals that need to happen in a particular order. So Russ needs to approve it. The good news is Russ is out of the office, and so I'm Russ's delegate, so I get to approve for myself. And then it moves on to Fabrice, who is going to approve it in the second level here. So nothing magic we have to do here other than approve it. So I'm going to approve it on behalf of myself. And then what we see here is we can see that I approved it. And then if we slide down here, we can see it's now in Fabrice's hands to approve. We're going to just quickly log in as Fabrice. Fabrice gets a to-do on his homepage. He also gets an email. He can get a notification in Teams even that he has something to approve. We can see right here, requisitions to approve. Here's the one I just did. We'll pull that up. We can take a look at it. If I wanted to even approve this via email, that's possible. I can even open our chatbot Gopher and approve via Gopher. But we'll do it today in the application itself. And everything looks good. We're going to approve. And from there, the requisition process moves into the purchase order process. And so if it can, in fact, and I just got 2 Teams notifications that this particular object has moved on, and we've now generated a purchase order from this. But before we delve too much into purchase orders, Sophie, did you want to sort of talk about the back end of the process?
We can do. I know we're coming up quite late into the process, so would you mind awfully if we pushed on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just keep pushing ahead here.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, so in our case here, we've transitioned that requisition to a purchase order. We can actually see that it changed our breadcrumbs here. This is the purchase order we're looking at, although it looks almost exactly like the requisition. But we can see it needs to have 2 additional approvals here. We're going to just do those really quick. Thanks to the magic of login magic. Okay, so I'm going to approve it. And then approver needs to approve it as well. And then we'll have an approved purchase order that'll get sent to the supplier. Okay. So through the automation, it's now going to take that purchase order that's been approved. It's going to generate the purchase order document, and it's going to send it off to the supplier in whatever mechanism we've defined as the mechanism the supplier would like to see. In this case, it just sent it via an email. So it generated through a template the purchase order that we're about to see here. So there's the purchase order, all filled out, ready to go, sent off to the supplier with email, copying me as the requisitioner, and away we go. So what does that mean, right? So this is getting us to the point where we've had the supplier involved, telling us what they can sell us, and we've now, with the PO, effectively requested them to deliver some stuff to us. So let me actually hit the wrong button there. Meant to go right back to the PO. So our PO has been sent. They can come back and tell us that they would like to receive it. They'd like to tell us when they're going to send it to us. They want to accept it or reject it. All of those things can be done by the supplier in the supplier portal. Let's assume all of that happened. And we've now, the goods and services have shown up on my desk, and I want to go ahead and retrieve the PO so that I can go ahead and receive those items, so we can move this forward in the process. So for a person that has the rights to receive it, they see a button. There's a number of different ways they'll see it to do. There's a bunch of different things that they can know that there's something ready to be received. In my case here, I'm just going to go to the PO. I'm allowed to receive it. This is going to show me the 2 items that I purchased. I can tell it here, did I receive them all? I can put a ledger, I can create a dispute from it if it wasn't quite what I asked for. We're going to go the quick and easy route here. We're just going to say, everything looks good, I'm receiving it. So that ultimately means that if we take a look back on the related PO, we'll see that the PO shows it has been received. If we follow that back to the requisition, we'll also see that it's been received. And so the last step in this process is to be invoiced on it. And so an invoice can come in a variety of ways. One of the ways it comes in is someone mailed a PDF of the invoice in. So using the magic of AI, we can grab that guy, automatically read the information from it. And I'll just give you an example here of a random one. So I left this one in a state called data review. In other words, I'm tricking it into believing that it didn't find out. So we sent a PDF to the system. This is showing me everything that's in purple is information that it extracted from here. So you'll see, as an example here, the supplier sender name, Greyhound Inc. Okay, I select on what it believes the supplier name is. It shows me this is where it found it. Okay, so it using a series of AIs, it finds the information from it, uses that to construct the invoice object in the system so that it can be paid.
Yeah, and this is a massive time saver, isn't it? Because even today, we know companies come to us with hordes of people who are inputting manually into a system, and this could digitize invoices, and not just invoices, other documents as well. Obviously, there is often other files sent, remittances,
terms and condition sheets.
Terms and condition sheets, yeah, shopping lists, anything can be sent to a generic email, and the solution will actually digitize all of the documents sent. The accuracy of digitizing the invoices is probably more than 95% now, and that grows with the AI as the system learns from the actions that you give them, and also self-learning. So this is a point where you could suddenly remove entirely the manual step of inputting, and significantly reduce the amount of time that it takes to deal with these kind of discrepancies thereafter, because it's so easy to see everything, and you only have to focus on the ones that don't go straight through, right? So that's the idea, to automate this process as much as possible, not just the invoice, but then the invoice reconciliation, and going straight through to pay, as much as you can, really. So that will save you so much time.
So the end result, again, running out of time, we're not going to be able to go through all of the details here. Let me just grab an invoice that's already been approved. The basic concept is we take the information that we got from that PDF, we use that to take a look at what's going on here. And here's an example of the tax didn't match on the invoice to the tax that had been previously calculated. So the system automatically created a discrepancy line to account for the difference in tax, either adding or subtracting the tax as necessary to do it here. It's letting me know the processes it used here. So there was some manual looking at it. It did some automatic work, but it was an automatic match process that ultimately generated a series of ledger entries that can be sent back to your ERP system to account for the actual spend in and of itself. So the whole process from beginning to end, the goal here is to provide visibility and automate as much of it as possible to take that work out of manual hands.
Yeah, exactly that. And you know, it's phenomenal the amount that you can actually generate in terms of savings. It's difficult to calculate sometimes because when you have a manual process, you don't really know how much time this process is taking. I think it was recently reported that APQC that it was some industries had like a £500 per invoice flow, you know, for in industries like construction. You know, the savings can be significant when you start off the process. But what's important is that you can also grow and change the process yourself, either to include more rules as the business changes, or to increase scope as you're bringing more and more spend under these kind of controls. So it's quite phenomenal. You know, the end of this process will loop back into spend analysis, really to say, okay, we've done this work, we focused on these areas. You know, what has the impact been, and where are we going to go next? You know, there's lots of approaches for different areas, and we've just touched on them really high level and a very kind of whistle-stop tour. But if you would like any further information from us, I will do a quick company intro if you can send the slides back to me, Swati. So just to let you know who we are, Corecentric, we actually provide procurement and finance transformation services with technology, with managed service, and with advisory. So we are one of the only players in our field where we can actually look at all this process, and actually the order to cash process as well, but we haven't touched on that today, where we can optimize and digitize your finance and procurement solution processes. We can advise you on each of these steps, and we can actually provide resource to help you extend your team to do some of these functions if you'd like as well. So the kind of customers that we work with, there's a few well-known names there. You know, these are just a handful of the notable customers that we have in a range of different industries. Really, we don't focus solely on one sector, given, I mean, I guess it shows the flexibility of the solution, really, and really the power behind the process, which is the business process engine that drives all of these automation processes. And you know, that could be similar to, you know, in finance to retail, to professional services organizations. It gives you the power to be able to change those processes yourself. And that's it, really. If you would like some more information, there's videos on our YouTube channel. There are, but please do contact me or the team. You can contact me directly at spope@corecentric.com, and I would love to hear if you have any questions or follow-up projects that you'd like us to give you some advice on or have a chat about, and on that, I know we've gone over, so I'm sorry about the time, but thank you, Matt, for joining us today, and thank you everyone on the call. There are a few questions, but I'm going to take them offline because we've already taken up over the timeline. So really appreciate your time today, and please reach out if you wanted to continue the conversation. Thanks a lot.